Over the past couple months, there has been a lot of talk about goalkeepers at Celtic Football Club. Since Joe Hart retired, it means that there's going to be a place that opens up for a new first choice keeper at Celtic this summer. And with upwards of 10 goalkeepers being linked with the clubs, I thought this was a nice and valuable opportunity to look back at the past, to see what keepers have came to Celtic and succeeded, and which have come to Celtic and failed. It's been real mixed fortunes when it comes to the position between the sticks, and today we're going to evaluate it. So stick around, it's tier list time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. It would be much appreciated. I promise you, I absolutely guarantee you this will not just be a summer full of tier list videos. But you don't seem to complain, you seem to love them. So we've got another one today. I am battering the life out of tier list videos, but it's a quiet news day, there isn't a lot there, and I like this idea that was presented to me on the last tier list video I done on Sunday. So credit to one of the viewers on the channel who gave me this idea in the comment section of the last tier list video, asking me to make a tier list ranking all Celtic goalkeepers from the year 2000. So today we're going to sit down and do exactly that. I'm actually quite looking forward to this because Celtic have had a real mixed fortunes with goalkeepers. For a long time, Celtic struggled with goalkeepers. We found it really difficult to find a real consistent number one for a real lengthy amount of time. And over the past decade or so, maybe the last 20 years, we've managed to stumble across a few gems. And we're going to talk about those guys today. So we're going to load up the old tier list. We're going to look at every goalkeeper that Celtic have had as the number one and beyond, backups included. And we're going to try and rank them from best to worst. So for certain viewers of certain ages, you remember a time when Celtic were hopeless with goalkeepers. For some, you might be blessed to remember the likes of Forster, Joe Hart in recent years. So it's going to be a real interesting one in the comments section. At the risk of taking all day, as I usually do with these tier lists, I'm going to try not to waste too much time. But here it is. Here is all 18 keepers who have established themselves within the first team squad over the past 24 years. 18 to be precise. And I know you might bring up a couple of guys. Michael McGovern comes to the mind. A few other people who have been in and out. We're trying to go with people who at least made a handful of first team appearances across the big competitions, the Premiership, Scottish Cup, League Cup and European football. So some people are excluded. These are the 18 who really made it to the first team. And we're going to try and go through every single one of them. Can I make a quick disclaimer? Very quick disclaimer. I'm 24 years of age. I was born in March 2000. We're going to start today with some of the keepers who I didn't really get to watch. So I've done my research, I've done some reading, I've also just used the knowledge that I already have, listening to my father, watching back old videos, documentaries, whatever. I'm going to try and give it as best of an assessment as I can, but just keep in mind, if you're a bit older than me, I didn't get to watch some of these guys week in, week out like you did, so my memories won't be as well tuned as yours. But here's the list of players. I'm going to organise it in order from 2000 to current day, and then we'll get cracking. So here we are, the list is organised. We're going to do it in order from earliest to most recent goalkeepers. Just a bit of fun today because there isn't much in the news. I'm kind of fed up of talking about keepers being linked. It's getting a bit tedious now. When there's something more realistic, we'll cover it. When there seems to be strides being made in the quest of signing a new goalkeeper, let's dwell in the past, shall we? And let's look at some of the goalkeepers who have either gave us some great memories or haunted our memories. Starting with Jonathan Gold. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Jonathan Gold signed for Celtic before 2000, but he was still Celtic's number one heading into the millennium. He was still the first pick when Martin O'Neill signed. It didn't last too long after Martin O'Neill became manager. Some would say he never truly recaptured his form from his first season as a Celtic player, but I think he was still solid enough. I think he made upwards of 150 appearances for the club by the time that he left. I would put Gold up to good keeper from the stories that I've heard. Now, I know he wasn't perfect, and as I said in the introduction to this video, Celtic really struggled for a long time. Packy Bonner was maybe the last great keeper we had up until we get to a certain individual in here. Celtic struggled for years. We let go of Shay Given without even giving him a chance in the first team. He really could have been the answer that we needed. we were floating about looking for a goalkeeper for a long time, but Gold was maybe the one who managed to get the most. You know, he made, as I said, over 150 appearances for the club. He was instrumental in Celtic stopping Rangers from winning 10 in a row. A good enough keeper. Some might argue that he deserves to drop down into May, but compared to some of the people we're going to talk about, I'm going to start off by putting him in good keeper. Moving on to the guy who took the position from Jonathan Gold, a certain Rab Douglas, who still to this day is a very polarising goalkeeper at Celtic. Whoever you ask of a certain age group will tell you really different things about Douglas. Some people liked him, some people couldn't stand him. He seemed very polarising in that regard. Once again, I was far too young to be able to tell you a personal account or a personal opinion of Rab Douglas as a goalkeeper. But for me, I think that Jonathan Gold maybe just edges him. Both of these guys could easily be in here, and we might assess at the end of the video. But right now, I'm going to put Douglas into May. He was somebody who, as I just said, found it really hard to establish himself amongst the Celtic support as a reliable number one. Had his ups and had his downs, had his moments. Of course, very famous red card in Europe. Rab Douglas still, that gets spoke about to this day, which opened the door for a certain David Marshall, who we'll come on to. But Rab Douglas, just somebody who, struggled to find that consistency in his game between the sticks. We're going to just put him into May. Depending on who you ask with Rab Douglas, some people will tell you he was unfairly criticised as a goalkeeper, but the fact that the criticism did stand out so much shows you that he wasn't the greatest keeper that Celtic ever had. A lot of people still have a grudge about him from the final in Seville. Is it fair to say he was at fault for Seville? That's your opinion. I wasn't old enough to make a fair judgment on that, but there you go, Rab Douglas, meh. I think the big difference between Douglas and Gold for me is the fact that Gold at least had that very big standout season when they stopped the 10 in a row, and he was really, really important. It was a great season from start to finish, whereas I don't think Douglas really had that. Never had one full season where he was just brilliant start to finish. But once again, some of the older fans in the comments might stand to correct that. Dmitry Karin, one of the very few Russian players to play for Celtic. You could say poor, you could say solid backup, you couldn't say didn't see enough. A lot of people won't even be familiar with the name Dmitry Karin, and no wonder really. For now, I'll sit him in here. We might move him down to poor, because there was intentions for him to maybe take... There was an opportunity there when Celtic were struggling for keepers for him to maybe stand up and rise to the occasion. Didn't do so, was never trusted in any big games, never played in any game of significance. For that reason, you could probably shift him into poor, and people who, obviously were around at the time will know far better than me if he was that poor or not. I'll put him into didn't see enough, in fairness, for the moment. Famous for being, and let me just read this out because this is an interesting fact for you. One of the few players, including Di Stefano of Argentina, Colombia and Spain, to have won an international honour for 3 countries, because he won honours with the USSR, the CIS and Russia, which was down to, of course, the political situation over in East Europe. So, good for him, I suppose, but barely played for Celtic. And Martin O'Neill ended up releasing him, so there you go. Now, Magnus Hedman is actually one that you could maybe make the case just to put him straight into poor or awful, because if my research is correct, this is somebody who at the time when he was signed, there was actually hopes he would be the answer to the goalkeeping problem. The fact that we had a real inability to sign a good goalkeeper. There was hopes that he would do that. He would be the new number one. He was Swedish. Obviously, Henrik Larsson was there. Johan Mjällby was there. There was high hopes. And he ended up playing 26 times for Celtic, signed him for £1 million from Coventry in 2002. It just wasn't good enough. Some good appearances. I think there was a highlight game against Anderlecht in Europe for Hedman, but generally, for spending £1 million on him and with all the hope and ambition that was installed in Hedman, it didn't really work out. Poor. I would put him in there for now. For that reason, I kind of want to put Karin down there as well, but at least there wasn't as much expectation on him. So, do you know what? We'll leave it like that for now. David Marshall. Now, David Marshall's actually quite a tough one to judge, because really, we didn't see enough of him as a Celtic goalkeeper. And I'm going to put him in there, and that might be controversial, but we didn't. He had that blockbuster performance against Barcelona, which was absolutely huge, and that's what he's most remembered for as a Celtic keeper. But it never really took off for him after that. He did have his chances. He did play for Celtic as first choice keeper, but then he ended up being loaned out to Norwich because Artur Boruc was better. He ended up signing permanently for Norwich. It never really went the way that people thought it might have following that Barcelona game. David Marshall quite simply didn't live up to that initial hyper expectation. Did we see enough of him? You could maybe argue that he deserves to maybe go up here, but he came in at such a young age, and maybe we just never gave him those opportunities that he needed to develop and flourish from those initial impressions that he gave off. So I am going to keep him and didn't see enough for that reason, because his performances did kind of dip in terms of quality. They ended up becoming quite mixed performances. But Boruc coming in just kind of shafted him, to be quite blunt. Yeah, I'm going to keep him and didn't see enough. And I'm also going to put this man in there as well, a certain Javier Sanchez Broto, somebody who only ended up playing 10 times for Celtic, but if you look at anything that's wrote about Javier Sanchez Broto, it seems to be a case of what could have been with the goalkeeper, who seemed to be liked. Spanish, of course, came in from Livingston on a short-term contract. There was an interview conducted in the papers a few years ago about how originally that wasn't meant to be a short-term contract. A mistake happened on the day he signed. It was meant to be a 3-year deal, apparently, and he's absolutely devastated still to this day that it wasn't a long-term deal for him to stay at Celtic. Somebody who wasn't all that bad, and could have been a lot more. That seems to be, when you type his name in Google, I never heard of him before today. I'm not going to lie to you, I never heard of him before today. Everybody on this list, bar him, I had heard of. And reading about him, it seems like, he could have been a whole lot more. That seems to be all the articles I read about him. So, had a big game. He played in Europe as well for Celtic. So, there's somebody that really could have been something special for us if given the opportunity, but never did because of the short-term deal. Apparently he cried like a little baby after the failure. That's what his words, by the way. He cried like a little baby after the failed contract thing. So yeah, didn't see enough of him. Could have been more for Celtic. Could have been the answer to the problems over time if given more. So I'd like to take a brief moment in the video to point out that this is now where I can finally kickstart with my own first-hand opinions and give a better account on certain players. Out of this list here, I was far too young to watch any of them play for Celtic. Far too young. David Marshall is probably the one that I can speak about the most. And that's saying a whole lot, because there wasn't an awful lot to speak about with David Marshall apart from that game against Barcelona. So, I don't know what you think of this. People of a certain age, people older than me, you might hate me for the way that I have ranked these keepers, but I feel like I've tried to go about it as fairly as possible and as best as I possibly can. Now, we can get cooking and get on to actually knowledgeable insight from myself. It's never knowledgeable insight with me. I don't know who I'm kidding on. Easy days. The best. Up there with the best. One of the best keepers in the club's history. My favourite player ever when it comes to Celtic Football Club. For me, it's quite simple. Scott Brown, Wayne Rooney and Artur Boruc. Those three are my favourite players of all time. I doubt it will change. I love Artur Boruc. Could have been better. That's the thing. For as good as he was, he could have been better. This is probably the first keeper that came around at Celtic since Packie Bonner, who I think fans unanimously had a good opinion of. And that opinion did dip as time went on. He kind of let himself go. There was moments where Boruc wasn't quite as good as he could be. We know that he was a particular man. He had his tastes. He had his habits. And it was fine because he was still great. He was unbelievable in Europe, unbelievable domestically. Artur Boruc is one of the best keepers Celtic have ever had. Simple as that. And I know a lot of people still don't even like to agree to that, but he was. And I'll not hear otherwise. He goes flying right to the top for me right now. The holy goalie himself. And it wasn't just his performances, it was his whole mantra, his whole aura at the club. He got Celtic, he loved Celtic, he embraced the fans, he wound up Rangers fans. Brilliant goalkeeper. Miss him so much. I wish that he could be back in his prime somehow. The holy goalie. Love him. Mark Brown, we'll put him in here. Not great, and he was. Funnily enough, when I was looking up and doing my research before, so I could get every goalkeeper, I didn't miss anybody out. For a number of years, there was only really the two of them at Celtic, Boric and Brown. That was it. Brown was Boric's backup. And when I was doing my reading and such about Mark Brown, you know, a lot of people think that Boric maybe let himself go a little bit because there was never serious competition for his place. Mark Brown was never going to dislodge Artur Boric from his place at Celtic. And he wasn't a great keeper. And I think that the rest of his career goes to show that as well. He was never Celtic quality. He was never the level of Celtic. I wouldn't even say he was a solid backup, because dropping from Boric to Brown was a significant dip in quality. He did play a few times and a couple of decent appearances in there, some opportunities for him, but generally just not good enough. Ended up leaving the club to go to Kilmarnock on loan, and then he ended up leaving permanently when he was released to go to Hibs. Yeah, it was never great, Mark Brown. And I was about 8, 9, 10 years old when he was around the team, and we seen very little of him, and there was good reason for it. Lucas Zaluska, was he a solid backup? Probably not. The thing is, Lucas Zaluska, before he signed for Celtic at Dundee United, he looked great. He looked like a really good side, and the intention obviously was for him to be the Artur Boric replacement. Artur Boric was the talk of him leaving the club for a number of months. We needed a goalkeeper to kind of step up and be ready to replace him, and Zaluska's performances at Dundee United gave you the impression it was going to be him, and very, very quickly we realised it couldn't be Lucas Zaluska. Why? Because he was poor. I wouldn't quite say awful, but he was poor. I think there's only maybe one or two here that we can truly say were awful, but Lucas Zaluska just wasn't it. And he wasn't necessarily a solid backup either. If you remember the early 2010s, nobody was happy if Zaluska was playing. We were all desperate for Fraser Forster to sign permanently, for example. He was poor. Being a backup keeper is never an easy job. Especially, it's not easy to judge it because you're ultimately not seeing them play a lot. But I think we can all be brutally honest when it comes to the poll that never lived up to the poll before him. I tell you who did live up to Artur Boric's quality. This man, Fraser Forster, who some people might have. I personally have Boric above him, so I'm keeping it like that. But he goes into the top. Fraser Forster, one of the greatest keepers the club's ever seen as well. And over the entirety of the club's history, these two are up there. When it comes to goalkeepers, Fraser Forster, across both spells he had at Celtic, unbelievable. Famous, of course, for his European performances in the run to the Champions League last 16 in 2012-13. The performance against Barcelona, which obviously had him dubbed as the Gran Muralla, the Great Wall. And then he came back and he done it again against Lazio in the Europa League for Neil Lennon in 2019-20. Unbelievable keeper when he was here at Celtic. Huge. Always reliable. Wasn't great with the ball at his feet, but the first time he was here, that was never a big thing. Back then it still wasn't the popular thing to have a keeper who was good with the ball at their feet. What mattered was a goalkeeper who could make saves, and boy did he know how to make saves. Fraser Forster, unbelievable. Quite miss him, to be honest, but I wouldn't have him back because I know that's a rumour and a thing. No, let's leave him up there and keep the memories as they are. Craig Gordon, who followed Fraser Forster, there was doubts about him at first, but boy, he ended up being a really solid keeper for Celtic. I wouldn't put him up there with Boric and Forster, absolutely not. But listen, he deserves a lot of credit, and he's somebody who, just like Gold and Douglas, seem to have quite a polarising opinion. People either love him or hate him, somewhere in between. Maybe that's because he's back at Hearts, I don't know, but Gordon was generally really, really good when it came to shot stopping. The thing was with Gordon, he was prone to a blunder. He was prone to a mistake, and he cost us with some of his mistakes. Some of his mistakes weren't just wee ones. They were, in Europe, they were costly. In Europe, that was his biggest thing about Gordon. In Europe, he was useless. Domestically, great shot stopper, great keeper, but in Europe, he never really cut it for us. And you think of Inter Milan, the goals he conceded, and then the mistakes against Salzburg, for example. Yeah, it was kind of just a step too far for him. But to be fair, the way he came into Celtic and revived his career, unbelievable. I think he was a solid keeper for us for years. Obviously was here for the Invincible treble and then the double treble. Was he here for the treble? Or was he moved on? But I think he was, wasn't he? And then he finally moved on, went back to Hearts. Yeah, Craig Gordon, it was solid for us, a good keeper. Logan Bailey, Christ, let's just get this over and done. I'd put him below Zaluska. Wasn't a solid backup by any stretch of the imagination. Funnily enough, we've not found a solid backup yet, and we're going to keep this up because they were around similar times. Let's get Doris de Vries in there as well. I'd put him above Zaluska. Both of them were poor. I don't mean to be harsh on people. I hate doing these tier lists sometimes because I feel really harsh on folk. But my God, both of them were. Bailey, outside of football, had a lot going on, if you remember. There was constantly stories about him popping up and his love of nightlife and such. De Vries came in. Brendan Rodgers had the intention to make him number one ahead of Craig Gordon. Boy, did that not happen. Craig Gordon was soon enough back in as number one for Celtic. Both of them were just poor. And Bailey ended up going to amateur level after Celtic. So, yeah, says it all really. Doris de Vries had a solid career, just maybe came to Celtic a little bit too late. And Craig Gordon was just much, much better. Scott Bain, finally, we find somebody who I find is good enough to put in solid backup. He's been a solid backup. You know, he's not great by any stretch of the imagination. He's not. But he's not terrible either. And he's served as backup now for, 5-6 years coming up? And he's never complained. He's just got on with the job, and when he's had to be called up his start for Celtic, he's done it. Remember, there was responsibility on his shoulders when Barkas was proven not to be good enough. Scott Bain deserves credit for that. You could even maybe say that he deserves to be in May, but we're saving May for maybe those keepers who were first team quality, or first team starting every week. Solid backup, Scott Bain. He's got to be backup for a number of years, I'd assume, if he's happy doing what he's doing, and it should be a lot of money to sit on the bench and be third choice. Sometimes he's not even on the bench to be third choice. So, yeah, Scott Bain, everybody. I would put Hazard into this same category as Broto, Carrion and David Marshall. We just didn't see enough of him. Now, I will caveat that by saying I don't think he was good enough. I don't think he ever would have been good enough to be Celtic's keeper. We've seen the level he's playing at now, and that would suggest that he was never going to be Celtic's number one goalkeeper. But he was a young lad who came in, stepped up in a really difficult time for Celtic goalkeepers, and helped us towards a quadruple threat. Well, I say helped us, he nearly sabotaged us, and then he helped us in the penalty shootout. But he was a young lad, you know what I mean? He was young at the time. He's got a long way to go with his career. Just never seen enough of him at Celtic. It's as simple as that. Ah, God. Let's just get it over and done with. Bring it up. I said he was going to be great. I loved him. I thought he was the answer to all the I thought he was going to be the next great thing for Celtic. One of the best keepers we'd ever sign, I think I said at some point. I know what I initially thought. It didn't turn out that way. We're arguably looking at the worst keeper in the club's history with Vasilis Barkas. And considering we spent £6 million on him, that is shameful. Yeah. Barkas, everybody. Enough said. Which brings us down to the last two, and two of the keepers who still remain with us at Celtic as we speak. Starting with Benjamin Siegrist, who I'm going to put him in here because I still, there's not for a second that I sit and think that Siegrist isn't a good goalkeeper, because he proved it at Dundee United. He's a good goalkeeper. So obviously just barely played for Celtic, so we haven't seen enough. I don't think we could sit and put him in poor and awful. We got him on a free. He came in to be backup. Maybe there was intentions for him to start eventually. But Joe Hart's Joe Hart. I think it'd be harsh to say poor awful. We just clearly haven't seen enough of him. So, the fact that Bain has been ahead of him in the pecking order maybe speaks volumes. But I think that's more to do with the fact that Siegrist has been just dying to leave and be a first team keeper somewhere else. And that's why Bain's probably been ahead of him. So yeah, that's Benji. So it means we finish off with the man who was our most recent number one, who retires with all the best wishes of the Celtic support and will go down as one of the best figures to ever have at a club in Joe Hart. Somebody who came in under so much scrutiny and doubt and then came out the other side as a modern day icon and sort of cult hero of the Celtic support. If you let recency bias come into play here, you'll have him probably up here. But if you're being genuinely realistic and honest with yourself, you'd maybe have him in here. Because let's not forget, a long time during the second season under Ange last year, and even at the start of this season, where people didn't want Joe Hart to be number one. But he had a great season. Is he as good as Boric and Forster? No, he's not. I love him. I actually prefer him, but he's one of my favourite Celtic players ever. You know how much I love Joe. He's up here. But I think if you're being honest, he was really, really good. I'd say better than Gordon and goal, definitely, but not on the level of Boric and Forster. And I'm trying to take recency bias away from it and saying that. I absolutely love Joe. I adore him. But there has been the difficult moments. And just because we went out in a high with him doesn't mean we're just going to forget all about it when it comes to judging these keepers. So I'm putting him at the top of the good keeper pile, but he's a good bit ahead of Gordon and Gold for me. So there we have it. There is my final list of Celtic goalkeepers over the last 24 years from the turn of the millennium. And what you will notice is we haven't had a large amount of great keepers at the club, and that's something that's went on throughout the 90s as well. You know, we have struggled to find keepers at times, and I hope that doesn't continue, that trend going into this summer. But that's my final assessment, which you might love or hate, I don't know. Right, like and subscribe. I've spoke too long. I'll see you next time.